Hello and welcome back to Learn the Bible in a Year for April 13th, 2026. Today is National Peach Cobbler Day. So if you need an excuse to eat dessert first today, you're welcome. I'll be eating some peach cobbler today too. Actually, you know what? I probably won't be eating peach cobbler, but it's nice to know that it's Peach Cobbler Day. Today we're going to be covering cities of refuge, rules for warfare, three parables about lost things, and a royal wedding song. So let's jump right into it. All right, diving into our Old Testament reading, we're still in Deuteronomy, and Moses is continuing to lay out legal framework for Israel's society, focusing today on justice and warfare. In chapter 19, Moses instructs the Israelites to set aside three cities of refuge in the promised land. These were safe havens for somebody who accidentally killed another person, like if an axe head flew off the handle and struck a neighbor. The manslayer would flee to one of these cities to escape the Avenger of Blood. We talked about that a couple episodes ago, which is usually a family member of the victim seeking retaliation. It was a system designed to prevent the shedding of innocent blood and to ensure a fair trial. However, if the killing was intentional, the city of refuge offered no protection. The elders of the city were to hand the murderer over to the avenger. Now, a question you might have here is, why did God set up this system of blood vengeance in the first place? It seems kind of barbaric to us. But in the ancient Near East, there were no centralized police force. This was the standard way of dealing with murder. And God was taking the existing cultural practice and putting strict boundaries around it to ensure justice rather than an endless cycle of revenge. Moses also establishes the rule that a single witness is not enough to convict someone of a crime. There must be two or three witnesses at least. If a witness is found to be lying, they are to receive the exact punishment they intended for the accused. God takes truth telling very seriously, especially when someone's life or livelihood is on the line. In chapter 20, Moses lays out the rules for warfare. Before going to battle, the priest was to address the army and tell them not to be afraid because the Lord, their God, is going to be with them and fight for them. Then the officers would actually dismiss anyone who just built a house, planted a vineyard, or gotten engaged so they can go enjoy those things. They even dismissed anyone who simply was afraid, so their fear wouldn't spread to the rest of the troops. God didn't need a massive, fearless army to win, he just needed people who trusted him. All right, jumping into our New Testament reading for today, we are in Luke chapter 15, which is arguably one of the most famous and beloved chapters in the entire Bible. Now, this is really funny that we're going through Luke 15. So, this coming Sunday, so here in like 6 days, I actually preach at my local church, Living Hope Church in Hayden, Idaho, on Luke chapter 15. So, prior to recording this episode and for the rest of this week, I'm going to be doing a massive deep dive study on Luke chapter 15, which famously ends with the parable of the prodigal son. Now, one book that I have read, or rather, I've listened to the audio version of it, is Tim Keller's book, The Prodigal God. I highly recommend this book. It's been really instrumental for me really understanding a lot of the nuances with the parable of the prodigal son, or as Tim Keller would put it, the parable of the two lost sons. So I'm going to give you that recommendation. Super, super good book. And it's just so funny that this episode lined up with the same exact week that I'm preaching on this chapter. So let's go through like a very, very condensed version and move forward. So this chapter opens with the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttering because Jesus is welcoming tax collectors and sinners and even eating with them. Now, in response to their grumbling, Jesus tells three parables about lost things: a lost sheep, a lost coin, and then a lost son. In the first two parables, a shepherd leaves his 99 sheep to find the one that has wandered off, and a woman turns her house upside down to find a lost silver coin. In both stories, when the lost item is found, there is a massive celebration. Jesus says that there is more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over the 99 righteous persons who did not need to repent. And then we get to the parable of the prodigal son, or as I prefer to call it, just like Tim Keller, the parable of the two lost sons. The younger son asks his father for his inheritance early, essentially wishing his father were dead, and he goes off to squander it in wild living. Now, when a famine hits and he's starving, feeding pigs, he finally comes to his senses and decides to go back home, hoping that he would be hired as a servant. But while he is a long way off, his father sees him and is filled with compassion and runs to him and throws his arm around him and kisses him. Now, the Greek word used here when the father says that his son was lost is apollymi, Apollyymi, which means to be fully destroyed or ruined. But now he is found. The father throws a massive party, putting the best robe on him, a ring on his finger, and sandals on his feet. It's a stunning picture of God's scandalous and extravagant grace towards sinners who have come home. That's why in the book by Tim Keller, he calls it the prodigal God. The word prodigal doesn't mean bad son. That's kind of what we think about because we're used to the parable of the prodigal son. But prodigal is a word that means to go until there is nothing left, to excessively give away, right? And so the prodigal person in this story is actually the father because the father goes to an unmeasurable length to welcome his son back in. But of course, the story doesn't end there. The older brother, who stayed home and, air quotes, obeyed all the rules, refuses to go into the party. He is angry and he is resentful. The father, in the same way that he goes out to the younger son, also goes out to the older son. And he pleads with him to come in and celebrate. And the interesting thing here is that Jesus leaves this story open ended. We don't know if the older son actually turned around and came in to celebrate and to be part of the banquet, or if he didn't. Now, the whole point of this portion of the story is to show that these older siblings, the older brothers, that's what the Pharisees are bringing. The younger son was serving himself by engaging in the pleasures of this world. And the older brother was also serving himself by using his father just for his inheritance and not actually having a relationship with him. Now, like I said, I'm going to do an entire sermon on this, so I don't want to give away too much. With that, you can always go to Living Hope's YouTube channel and check out that sermon if you want to. But of course, it's not going to be live here for like a week, so it's not live right now. But if you're listening to this in the future, it will be live. So go check it out over there. All right, and we're finishing up reading Psalms 45, and we're reading verses 1 through 9 today. And it goes like this. My heart is stirred by a noble theme. As I recite my verses for the king, my tongue is the pen of a skillful writer. You are the most excellent of men, and your lips have been anointed with grace, since God has blessed you forever. Grind your sword on your side, you mighty ones. Clothe yourself with splendor and majesty. In your majesty, ride forth victoriously in the cause of truth, humility, and justice. Let your right hand achieve awesome deeds. Let your sharp arrows pierce the hearts of the king's enemies. Let the nations fall beneath your feet. Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. All your robes are fragranted with myrrh and aloes and cassia from places adorned with ivory. The music of the strings make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your honored women, and at your right hand is the royal bride in gold of Ophir. All right, this show has been brought to you by Good Leads. Now, full disclosure, Good Leads is a company that I own personally, and we provide outbound leads to medium-sized B2C businesses. Good Leads is dedicated to helping businesses maximize revenue while decreasing marketing costs. To find out more, click the link in the show notes to see if your business qualifies. This episode is also sponsored by Covenant Security Equipment. Covenant Security Equipment is a Christian-owned company that sells everything home and business security. They sell things like safety windows and doors and walls and safes and you name it, everything you can think of. To find out more, go to covenantsecurityequipment.com. All righty. What was your main takeaway from today's reading? My main takeaway is actually a little nugget in the prodigal son story, right? And I think this is, I'm going to try to explain this to you. I'm in the middle of trying to put this into my sermon, so my thoughts aren't like fully formed yet on this, but there's a nugget in here that I think we can all learn. In the modern American Western Christian world, the pitch, if you will, about Christianity is, hey, you're doing bad things. You should find Jesus instead, and then Jesus will give you heaven. And so, for the unsaved person, our attitudes towards Jesus is typically, at least in the Western world, Do I choose heaven or do I not choose heaven? And that tends to be kind of the balance with that decision. But if we look at the prodigal son, that's not the decision that the prodigal son made. The son went out to the world and engaged in sex, drugs, and rock and roll until ran out of all of his money. And he came to the conclusion that this life was a waste, this life that he was living, and he was eating pig slop. Now, when he finally decided to turn back to the Father, was his perspective, I'm going to turn back to the Father so that I can have a great party and he can put a robe on me and he can put a ring on my finger and I can get my inheritance back and all that stuff? Was that his perspective? No, that wasn't his perspective. His perspective was, I'm going to go back to the Father and be a servant to him. Now, we know from the story that the Father is so full of grace and so full of mercy that he gave him the mercy to forgive him of his wrongdoing, and then also lavished so much grace on top of those things, right? But the Son's perspective was to be a servant of the Father. And I think that in our culture, we need to have that perspective a little bit more. The choice of Christianity, the choice to choose Jesus, shouldn't be a choice of do I want heaven or do I not want heaven? The choice to be a Christian is the choice to serve the Father or to not serve the Father. And all the extra gifts that the Father gives us on top of that, that's great. That's awesome. That's God's grace, but that's secondary. The choice needs to be, am I going to serve the Lord? And my fear is that, or at least what I've observed in the Western Christian world, is that middle part where we serve Him. We don't talk about that too much. We like to talk about the reward. We like to talk about heaven. We choose Jesus, we get heaven, but we're not really making a decision to serve the Lord. We're making a decision to receive from the Lord. And I think we got some things a little bit out of order there. So that's one thing that the Lord has been convicting me of. All right. Well, that was a little bit long. Sorry for the little bit of rambling there. Usually I'm a little more tight, but I'm still trying to work through some of these things as I prepare for my message on Sunday. Alrighty, well, that's the episode for today, and I will see all of you cool cats again here tomorrow.